In the upcoming Game of Thrones prequel show, House of the Dragon, we will see a Targaryen civil war that stretches across the entire Seven Kingdoms between two factions, Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen and her uncle-husband Daemon Targaryen's Blacks, against the Queen, Alicent Hightower, and her Greens. Most of our histories of this event are told to us through The World of Ice and Fire and Fire and Blood, and they tend to focus the story on the Targaryens, and everything we've seen so far in the casting of the TV show points to that being the focus as well. But outside of House Targaryen, there are plenty of interesting characters that play a very important role in the Dance of Dragons. Both houses we are familiar with if you watched Game of Thrones, and new houses that you may hear about for the first time. So I hope this video can serve as a guide for those who only watched the show, or a refresh for those who have read The World of Ice and Fire or Fire and Blood, which are our histories of Westeros. The North, House Stark. In A Game of Thrones, House Stark was our focal point, with Ned's rise to Hand of the King and fall in trying to save his friend King Robert Baratheon from the betrayal of his wife Cersei Lannister, Catelyn's rash decision to capture Tyrion, Robb's rush to war, Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon are all spread across every corner of Westeros as they struggle to survive and make their own way in the world. But in House of the Dragon, roughly 200 years before Game of Thrones, House Stark has seen the birth of Cregan Stark in 108 AC. Cregan will come to play a very important role in House of the Dragon, as at the end of the dance, he comes south and basically puts an end to the war, in an event known as the Hour of the Wolf. Given his young age, it's likely we won't see him much in House of the Dragon, at least not until the later seasons. That's not to say House Stark will be absent from the show, but I do think they will play a much smaller role, at least earlier on. The Vale, House Arryn. In the Vale, just like we saw with Game of Thrones, House Arryn's story is likely to start off with a major death before our story begins. In Game of Thrones, it was Jon Arryn, Hand of the King and lifelong friend to Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark. Here it will be the death of Aemma Arryn. That will be a major catalyst for the events to come in the Dance of the Dragons. Aemma Arryn is the first wife to King Viserys Targaryen and mother of Princess Rhaenyra. During her marriage, she suffers from multiple miscarriages and finally dies during childbirth in 105 AC, giving birth to Balon Targaryen, who also dies just a day later. Her death will lead to a massive power struggle as Viserys will marry the much younger Alicent Hightower, who clashes with Princess Rhaenyra. During the dance, House Arryn will side with Rhaenyra and the Blacks, being led by Jane Arryn, the Maiden of the Vale. Jane's story, much like most of the stories we have about the Dance of Dragons, have two very different sides to it, as some are told by maesters and others are told by Mushroom, the court fool, whose histories are wild, to say the least. At the start of the Dance of Dragons, Prince Jacaerys Velaryon flew north on his dragon Varimax to foster allies for the cause of his mother Rhaenyra Targaryen, herself the daughter of Aemma Arryn. According to Mushroom, Lady Jane offered Jacaerys the allegiance of the Vale of Arryn if he could bring her to climax using his tongue. Rand Maester Munkin's True Tellings makes no such mention. He quotes Jane, citing that despite her contempt for Prince Daemon Targaryen, Rhaenyra was an Arryn on her mother's side, and women should band together. Her only request was dragon riders to protect the Eyrie from the Green's own dragons. After Jacaerys agreed, Lady Jane and her warriors knelt before the prince. The Riverlands, House Tully. While a large part of Game of Thrones took place in the Riverlands, with the Freys and Robb's battles against Tywin and Arya and the Hound's adventures, House Tully mostly took a back seat, except for a few great moments of Brendan Blackfish and the sort of idiotic Edmure, who they reduced to comedic relief. But during the Dance of the Dragons, the Tullys play a rather important role, led by Lord Grover Tully, an aging ruler who wanted to support King Aegon II Targaryen and the Greens, but no word of support ever left Riverrun. Feeling the wrath of the dragons that both the Greens and the Black held, his grandson, Sir Elmo Tully, kept the Tully Bannermans at Riverrun. While Grover was furious with his grandson, he is too old and bedridden to oppose him. The Tullys do finally join the war in support of Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen after Sir Adam Valerian visits Riverrun atop Seasmoke. Much to Lord Grover's wrath, Joining Sir Adam's army, Elmo Tully led the Riverlords to victory at the Second Battle of Tumbleton. Lord Grover passes away soon after that battle, with Elmo succeeding his grandfather as Lord of Riverrun. As the host of Lord Boros Baratheon began attacking the late Rhaenyra's loyalists around King's Landing, Elmo summoned the Riverlords to war and marched a host of 6,000 men toward the capital. While marching to King's Landing, Elmo dies from drinking bad water only 49 days after succeeding his grandfather. He was succeeded by his eldest son, Sir Kermit Tully, who led the Riverlords to victory against the Baratheon host. And yes, we can easily see the influence George must have had when writing these characters. In fact, it makes that incredibly weird Cersei and Tyrion ad with Elmo make slightly more sense. The Westerlands House Lannister. While the Lannisters were mostly viewed as the villains of A Game of Thrones, at least Cersei, Tywin, Joffrey, and sometimes Jaime, the Lannisters were able to claim power and use influence to continue to best position their house for success. In the Dance of the Dragons, the head of House Lannister at that time, Lord Jason Lannister, supports the Greens along with his brother Sir Tyland, who was the Master of Ships and a member of the Small Council during the reign of Viserys I Targaryen. Tyland is named Master of Coin at the start of the dance, and he seizes the royal treasury and divides the crown's gold into 4 parts. One part is entrusted to the care of the Iron Bank of Braavos for safekeeping, another sent under strong guard to Casterly Rock, and a third to Old Town. The remaining wealth was used by the Greens for bribes and gifts for hiring sellswords. Lord Jason Lannister is killed in the Battle of the Red Fork, leaving Casterly Rock in disarray. The Lannister host under Lord Humphrey Lefford was then shattered in the battle by the Lakeshore, the bloodiest battle of the war after the fall of King's Landing. Tywin Lannister was given to torturers in the hopes of recovering some of the crown's treasury. The Iron Islands House Greyjoy. During the Dance of the Dragons, Lord Dalton Greyjoy was offered the office of Master of Ships and a place on the Small Council by King Aegon II Targaryen in exchange for an alliance. Preferring Rhaenyra Targaryen's offer over Aegon's, Dalton sided with the Blacks instead. Dalton raided along the western coast of Westeros during the remainder of the war. Following the war's end, the regency of Aegon III commanded him to cease his raiding, but he ignores them. Aegon III's regents eventually sent Lord Aelin Velaryon to the Westerlands to deal with Dalton. Dalton was eventually murdered at Faircastle by a woman named Tess, one of Dalton's 21 known salt wives. Accounts differ as to what is actually known of her, whether she was 13 or 30, pretty or plain, virgin or widow, when Lord Greyjoy found her, how long she had been a salt wife, whether she was mad with jealousy or despised him for his reaving and raping. All that is known for certain is that she cut his throat open from ear to ear with his own dagger after he had his pleasure with her, and threw herself naked and bloody into the sea below. So, as usual, the Greyjoys are making bad decisions by thinking they're above everyone and anyone, even though they live on tiny islands and have no real way of waging any kind of actual war. The Reach House Tyrell. As the Dance of the Dragons begins, Lord Lionel Tyrell is an infant, and his regent mother was judged likely to align the Reach with the house's overmighty bannermen, the Hightowers and the Greens. However, House Tyrell decides to take no part in the war. The Tyrell bannermen, on the other hand, were split during the war, with men of the Reach fighting on both sides. Dorne, House Martell. For many reasons, Dorne was largely cut out of the TV adaptation of Game of Thrones, whether it was due to poor ratings or lack of content from the still missing Winds of Winter. Dorne's role was minor, and that's probably likely to be the case here as well. In 110 AC, Prince Corin Martell gives his support to the Triarchy in the War for the Stepstones, which takes place before the Dance of the Dragons. The Triarchy is an alliance of the free cities of Myr, Lys, and Tyrosh, 3 colonial daughters of the Valyrian Freehold. In Westeros, the Triarchy was known as the Kingdom of the Three Daughters, or more rudely, the Kingdom of the Three Whores. The kingdom of the Narrow Sea had no king, but instead was governed by the High Council of the Triarchy, a group of 33 magisters. The Triarchy existed from 1996 AC until its dissolution from a civil war which began in 130. Daemon Targaryen also plays a large part in winning many battles in the Stepstones. During that time, King Viserys Targaryen also spoke of wedding his daughter to the Prince of Dorne as a way of finally uniting the Seven Kingdoms, although ultimately this does not occur. So during the Dance of Dragons, Prince Corran was contacted by the Hand of the King Otto Hightower, but refused an alliance, claiming he would sooner sleep with scorpions. The Stormlands House Baratheon. During the Dance of the Dragons, Lord Boros Baratheon sided his house with Aegon II Targaryen and the Greens, despite his late father, Lord Bormund Baratheon's support of the Blacks, given his relation to Rhaenys Targaryen through his sister Jocelyn Baratheon. During the war, Prince Aemond Targaryen was sent to Storm's End to persuade Lord Boros to side with Aegon II by offering him a betrothal between himself and one of Lord Boros's 4 daughters. It is unknown whether this marriage occurred prior to Aemon's death or the next year. Lord Boros Baratheon was reluctant to face the dragons during the war, but marches with his army towards the end of the war, seizing King's Landing for Aegon II during the Moon of the Three Kings, restoring the city to order. He was then promised that his eldest daughter would marry King Aegon II, who had lost both his queen, Helaena Targaryen, as well as both of his sons during the war. Boros then marched against the approaching Riverlander army and fought in the Battle of the King's Road, where he was killed by the young Lord Kermit Tully. So I hope that this serves as sort of a guide as to what is happening with some of the other houses during the Dance of the Dragons, which will be House of the Dragon, the new Game of Thrones prequel show. Obviously, the focus is going to be on the Targaryens and the Valerians, as that's the majority of the story, and we have a lot more information there. Some of this information we have with a lot of these other houses and characters is rather small, and some of it may feel like it's just bullet points, but that's just most of the information that we have. So I hope that this just serves as sort of a guide as to what's going on, and we can see how this is going to end up playing out in the show. So I appreciate you guys staying and watching it all. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, and remember that winter is coming.